When I saw Gravity in theaters for the first time, I wasn't particularly impressed with it, but I couldn't place my finger on why that was. It wasn't until much later did I realize just how vapid the actual narrative and character aspects of the film are. While the visual part of the film, specifically the cinematography, is worthy of praise, I'm still baffled by the universal acclaim this film has received and the fact that it was nominated for Best Picture. It's simply one of the most overrated films I've seen in a long time. First of all, I did see the film in 3D, which I think is a complete and utter waste of money. Viewing a film in a three-dimensional manner indicates to some degree that objects and people will literally pop off the screen as if I can physically touch them, but I've yet to see a film that does this properly. Even films like Avatar and Toy Story 3, films that were supposedly shot and enhanced around 3D. The experience is essentially viewing a 2D movie while wearing glasses to me. The only thing I end up noticing is my wallet being lighter than it should be due to the $5 price difference for the tickets, which is why I don't go out and see movies in 3D. Gravity wasn't any different for me, and viewing it in 3D didn't elevate the experience for me at all. With that being said, the film still managed to excel in the visual category, especially in terms of the cinematography. No edits were made for the first 12 or so minutes of the film, which was impressive and noticeable. This really did a great job of making the audience feel as if they were actually with these characters out in space by continually tracking them. Now, I was by no means blown away by this effect, due to playing the Call of Duty games where the player is placed into very visceral wow moments in first person, such as jumping off a tall waterfall or parachuting out of an airplane. But that doesn't take away from the cinematography and visuals being well done, it's just that I wasn't as impressed by them as most people were. The film starts off with a description of the atmosphere of space, followed by a continuous long shot of the Earth from space, as a shuttle attached to a satellite slowly comes into view. Three astronauts are tasked with repairing some communications component of the satellite. George Clooney is introduced and goes into some backstory about how his wife cheated on him. Now, I'll just go into one of my biggest problems with the film right off the bat. George Clooney is not a character in the film, he's a caricature. I don't have an official term for this, but it's when an actor continues to play the exact same role over the course of several films to the point where the audience views the character in the film as the actor. This is true of Jason Statham and more recently Liam Neeson, for example, where they portray indistinguishable characters across multiple films, and I fail to associate them as actual characters that inhabit the film world they're in. The difference here is that I'm not a George Clooney fan, and the fact that he's portraying himself in a film nominated for Best Picture put a damper on the entire experience for me. Granted, it's a subjective issue, but I just couldn't look past that. Anyway, the other astronaut named Sharif proceeds to do some Macarena dancing for a few seconds, and his contribution to the overall plot ends there. We are then introduced to Ryan Stone, the protagonist and only real character of the film, where she states they've been out in space for about a week, but what they've been doing for that period of time remains a mystery to me. I mean, have they only been trying to repair the comms channel on this satellite for a whole week? Because Stone says she can repair it in an hour. Whatever, I suppose that's not important. Also, it's implied that George Clooney, aka Matt Kowalski, is on his final space mission, but that isn't properly explained in detail either. Then we hear that a Russian satellite has incurred a missile strike, but again, the nature of this event is unexplained. Who fired the missile? Why? I take more of an issue with this because it's the inciting incident of the film, and not just some backstory. This event is supposed to drive the story forward, but when something like this is shrouded in mystery, I tend to become disengaged from what's going on. After some more useless rambling from George Clooney and Sharif, we learn that debris is heading in their direction from the destruction of the satellite, which has hit other satellites and started a chain reaction. Okay, so instead of a terrorist attack, it's revealed that some Russian morons shot down their own satellite for no apparent reason other than their right of disposal because it was a spy sat that went bad, according to George Clooney. What do you mean, went bad? And somehow they weren't aware of creating a chain of reaction of debris or didn't bother to check with other countries if there were astronauts operating in the area? And why didn't they bother to go up there and fix it instead of wasting millions of dollars by blowing it up? This contrived setup isn't believable or compelling to me in the slightest. The debris then slams into the satellite, Sharif dies, and Ryan breaks off and drifts in space by herself. The camera actually moves into Ryan's helmet to create a near first-person view of what's occurring, and is actually quite effective in creating a sense of loneliness and desperation. But then we get into my main issue with the interaction between the two leads as Matt saves Ryan, and that's the stark disparity in how they view the situation. On one hand, Ryan is in a complete state of shock and panic, but has difficulty executing basic commands like flashing a light and telling Matt what her display readings are. But Matt doesn't appear to be fazed in the slightest as he resorts to joking about how good looking he is. Once again, George is just playing himself here, but his reaction and attitude towards what's going on isn't believable to me. I'm fine with one character displaying more composure than the other in this situation, but here they're just polar opposites. Ryan is completely helpless to the point where she may as well not even be an astronaut, while Matt doesn't seem to show any concern at all. Each character is operating on the extreme side of the spectrum, and this goes on for a while. Meanwhile, the two go to Sharif's dead body and a picture of his family is visible. This would have been far more effective had we actually known anything about this character, but the moment still stands as one of the only where I felt something in the film. They go to the shuttle only to discover the rest of the crew is, unsurprisingly, deceased, and Matt points to some Russian space station that evidently came out unscathed from the debris and states that they can use the escape pod, the Soyuz, to return to Earth. So the two are on their merry way to the space station while Matt proceeds to ask Ryan questions about herself even though she only has 2% of her oxygen remaining, and Matt was the one who said to preserve the oxygen. I suppose he's just trying to comfort her by distracting her from the situation, but it doesn't seem logical. And why didn't he bother to ask these questions sometime during the past week or so? It doesn't really matter because this is the only time we get any character development in the entire film. The most important thing we learn about Ryan is that her daughter died from hitting her head at school at the age of 4, and since Ryan was driving in a car when she heard about it, she's been driving along ever since. Ryan and Matt reach the station and try to grab hold of anything while Ryan flails around yelling, "What do I do?" as if she has no experience or knowledge at all, instead of doing what Matt instructed her to, which is to grab onto something. So Ryan has her foot caught on a thin rope that isn't able to sustain both of them, so Matt sacrifices himself for Ryan. This is probably the best moment of the film in terms of execution, as the dramatic music elevates the intensity of the moment. It's just a shame that I never gave a damn about Clooney's character, and had he been developed more, this scene really could have been emotionally impactful as he drifts away to his death in space. Matt's still able to talk to her for a while though, and it's revealed that Ryan crashed the flight simulator every time during her training at NASA. So why the hell would they allow her to partake in this mission if she's that incompetent? How the hell was she even allowed to pass if she failed a flight test numerous times? This is just more nonsensical bullshit. Ryan enters the station, and here comes a deep rebirth metaphor as she goes into a fetal position while some nearby ropes behind her symbolize umbilical cords. Now, just because the writer includes some metaphor in the film doesn't mean that the narrative is any deeper or more meaningful if the metaphor is thrown in haphazardly. In this case, the idea of rebirth suggests to me that the character associated with the metaphor undergoes an immense transformation or arc, and I just didn't see that here. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce Wayne's rise from the pit altered his fundamental belief that not fearing death made him stronger when it in fact held him back. While not perfect, the symbolism there worked effectively because it was clear to me as to what he believed before his alteration and what he gained from it afterwards. Here, we learn about Ryan's daughter dying, but the subject is never fully explored, and her character didn't change to me at all. What I believe the writers were going for was that Ryan was dead inside as a result of her daughter's death and was just sort of going through the motions back on Earth. And now she must make the hard choice of whether anything on Earth is actually worth going back for. But she doesn't become more capable or experienced in terms of finding a way of getting back to Earth, and she certainly doesn't seem to encompass a new life perspective or even be conflicted about whether going back to Earth is worthwhile. If the narrative had delved into more depth about how much her daughter's death affected her and then displayed her differently, this could have really worked well. I almost feel as though the daughter shouldn't have died, or that it should have been reworked in a way so Ryan would have a real reason to return to Earth aside from just her basic survival instincts kicking in. Ultimately, the entire metaphor fell flat and was unconvincing to me. We discover that the Russian space station has been evacuated, which begs the question as to why they didn't just send the Russian astronauts to rework or repair the satellite if they were that close to it to begin with. Ryan tries to contact Matt, but the scene just confirms what the audience already knows at this point. He's dead. So she enters the Soyuz to go to a nearby Chinese space station, which I guess is evacuated as well, because for whatever reason, the Soyuz itself is incapable of properly landing back on Earth. And Matt stated this before the two of them even got to the Russian station, so did he just not see the Chinese station, or did he want to enter the Russian station so Ryan could get oxygen, or was the Chinese station too far away to drift to? Whatever. Another issue I have is that the writer makes Ryan tell everything she's doing to the audience rather than showing it during the second half of the film. Hence, it breaks the traditional principle of showing rather than telling. In the film All Is Lost, for example, Robert Redford's character says nothing and the writer trusts the audience enough to figure out what he's doing. The approach used here comes across as lazier by comparison. After another CGI extravaganza fest that's mildly entertaining, Ryan boards the Chinese lifeboat. She tries to contact Houston Control, but for a reason that isn't explained at all, the lifeboat is able to receive a transmission from some random Asian man who's out in the middle of nowhere. How the hell does that work? This is more contrived nonsense. She then feels compelled to imitate the dogs that are with the man. Now, I saw the add-on short film that depicts this scene from the man's point of view, and frankly, I don't think it really added that much. I like the idea of hope versus despair here, in that this is the last person she'll ever talk to before she's doomed, but this is the first and unfortunately last time the audience sees her being something other than a helpless idiot, and the only time that Sandra Bullock manages to shine as an actress. While the dog howling became a bit too silly for me, the emotional value of the scene was overall positive. Then things take a turn for the worse as one of the dumbest parts of the film unfolds. Just when you thought you had enough of George Clooney, he miraculously returns and enters the lifeboat with Ryan. Clooney's lighthearted charm utterly diminishes the emotion that the previous scene had built up as he slugs down some vodka. He then says some motivational sentences to Ryan that can be basically summarized by saying "get back to Earth," which is what Ryan's been trying to do all along. I think this is supposed to be the turning point for Ryan, and maybe I just missed something here, but it just doesn't feel convincing to me because Clooney doesn't provide any new insider information. He's simply reiterating what the audience and Ryan already know. It turns out that the whole scene was a hallucination/dream sequence, so not only does this scene not add anything to the overall story, and not only does it act against the mood of the previous scene, but to me it also undermines George Clooney's dramatic send-off nearly 35 minutes ago by bringing him back in ghost form for no useful purpose. But hell, given all the nonsense that's already happened so far, it wouldn't have surprised me at all if he actually had survived somehow and made it into this lifeboat. And how is any of this even possible? I know she was temporarily breathing in some CO2, but is that enough to warrant vivid, lifelike hallucinations? Ryan talks about her daughter for a little while to dead George Clooney in her mind, and this is fairly emotional, but it doesn't have the chance to build up as much as it should due to the previous scene. I think it would have worked better if the dream sequence had been cut out and the one before it with the Asian man and this current one should have been interwoven. That way the emotion is allowed to build up rather than having the tonal inconsistency of seriousness in the first scene, laid back in the next, and immediately ramping back up to serious again. Ryan then goes to another space station. Wait a minute, I thought this lifeboat was capable of going down to Earth. No? Whatever. So she enters another abandoned space station and goes into another shuttle, where she says eeny meeny miny mo to the buttons because she's once again incapable of properly operating it. Her guesswork must have paid off though, as the shuttle descends quickly into Earth's atmosphere and finally plunges into a lake in what appears to be the middle of some random jungle in South America. Luckily for Ryan, this spacecraft is somehow able to establish contact with Houston, and they inform her that they're issuing a rescue mission for her. So Ryan climbs out of the shuttle, swims up out of the lake, and crawls onto the sand before finally getting up and walking into the jungle, and the film ends. Now, despite all my bitching so far, I still don't think the film is bad, just monumentally overrated. It's very mediocre/adequate, and functions more as a thrilling cinematic roller coaster ride than anything else. And that's disregarding the scientific inaccuracies and impossibilities that people who are knowledgeable about space operations have already outlined elsewhere. But I didn't hate the film like I did This Is the End, where all I have to do is describe the plot for you to know it's terrible. There were a handful of parts that I thought were well done, and the visuals and cinematography deserve awards, but those are really the only two things people seem to praise about this film, and I don't think it's enough to justify nominating this film for Best Picture. To me, Best Picture film nominees should encompass and excel in all aspects of filmmaking. First and foremost, a good story and good acting along with the more technical aspects. Gravity may have great visual effects and cinematography, but ultimately falls short in the categories that are fundamental towards creating a film that is truly worthy of being Best Picture. The end.